Lord Mayor, thank you so much for joining us.
Great. It's fantastic to be on the podcast.
Absolutely. So the City of London Corporation is around 1,000 years old. Wow, that's just amazing. For any of our audience that may not be as familiar, could you let us know a bit about this organization and specifically your role as the 693rd mayor?
That's right. It's a number that sort of almost sort of scares me at times. 693rd Lord Mayor of London. The corporation is, as you say, 1,000 years old, possibly even older. It's the longest continuously operating municipal government in the world, and it still does that. It still looks after the City of London, the square mile at the heart of Greater London, a city within a city, but. Of course, over the centuries, the role of Lord Mayor has expanded. So I'm not only the civic head of the City of London Corporation, but I'm an ambassador for the UK's financial and professional services sector, and indeed increasingly our tech sector as well. So in a typical year as Lord Mayor, I'd spend maybe 80, 90 days travelling the world talking about our fantastic financial and professional services here in the UK, bringing business delegations with me, talking about the issues that are really important and really current. Because all that history is wonderful, but it's a platform, and we've got to use the platform not to look backwards, but to look forwards, to think about the challenges that are around us in the world today, and even more importantly, the challenges of tomorrow, next year, and the decades ahead.
And I think that's a great segue, those challenges that we're seeing now, as well as what we're going to see into the future and how financial services might be able to support solutions. And before turning to the wider issues on climate specifically and the role of financial markets in all this, I want to start with your own track record. So what you are doing and accomplishing right now, a series of public climate commitments to reduce emissions to net zero by 2040. And then there are those near-term targets of 2027. So talk a bit about the process and how you see the steps moving forward evolving.
Well, this is the City of London Corporation's own climate action strategy, which we adopted a couple of years ago now, with some very clear goals. First of all, to be net zero in terms of our own our own operations by 2027, and we're on track to achieve that. So we're looking at all of the sort of the day-to-day activities which the City of London Corporation across the range of things that we're responsible for, looking at how we make those net zero, and there's a lot of thought being put into that. It was a costed strategy, and as I say, we're confident that we're going to deliver on that target by 2027. But we're looking more widely and actually thinking about all of what's described as our Scope 3 emissions, looking at our investments and all of those other inputs, our suppliers, all of those other inputs that make up your entire carbon footprint, looking to be net zero on that by 2040, which is 10 years ahead of the government's target for the UK as a whole. And we're trying to bring the square mile with us so that it's not just the City of London Corporation, but it's all those businesses that are housed here in the square mile as well, in the City of London as well. We're optimistic. We're pretty optimistic that we'll get there. It's gaining real traction now. I know lots of businesses are thinking about how they will get to net zero themselves in their own operations and in their own wider scope of business. I think we'll get there. I'm pretty optimistic.
So there's a lot to be optimistic about. You know, the UK is really seen as leading the way here. And I know we spoke earlier about visiting different countries. So I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on the way forward for developing countries and developing economies? What role do you see the UK is playing? What role do you think developed nations and economies could play to support developing countries as they really move forward in this direction?
Well, this is really at the heart of so much of what we're working on at the moment. I'm just back from Brazil and Chile last week. I had a series of great meetings in Santiago and then in Sao Paulo, and climate comes up, and the climate change challenge, net zero, and the importance of green and sustainable finance came up in pretty much every single meeting that I had in Brazil and in Chile. So this is absolutely top of the world agenda. What can we do in terms of London and the UK and as I say, our fantastic financial and professional services sector? Well, we have got the expertise, we've got the capital, we've got the money here. We got to mobilize it. We've got to make sure that it's getting into the developing economies of the world, getting into the global south, helping them solve the problems that they've got. It's because if they're not solving, if they can't solve the problems, it doesn't matter what we do here. We are still going to have a major issue. We will not have cracked the climate change challenge if we can't get the developing world into a net zero position alongside us as well. So there's lots of things we can do. As I say, capital, mobilizing that capital, getting it in, but also our financial and our legal and our professional expertise too. So we've got one of the big problems we've got at the moment is there's plenty of capital. There's no shortage of capital looking to go into green, sustainable, investable projects. The problem is the projects, where they are, how they're structured. We've got to work through this with countries to construct investable propositions around the world so that we can get that capital in and start making a real difference on the ground in countries like Brazil, in areas like the Amazon.
Wow. And when we're talking about what's being done on the ground, the wonderful piece of this is the move toward the just transition. So making sure that the transition happens, but to make sure that no one's left behind, if you will. In terms of the work that the UK is doing to make sure that training and jobs are really top of mind to ensure that just transition happens, what would you say are some of the most important steps for a just transition?
Well, the just transition again is so important, because if the costs, if we're not going to get this cost benefit allocation right, it's going to be very hard for the developing economies to come along with us. But I'd point out actually the just transition is not just an international problem; it's a domestic problem as well. If you think about the steps that we've got to take here in the UK economy, we've got to make sure that those who are going to be affected, on whom the costs fall, are supported through that as well. But we have a national just transition challenge ahead of us, just as the world has ahead of it. But I'm optimistic because, as you've mentioned, some of the things that we can do. We can help through skills and training. We can actually help in that job creation. One of the great things about this green revolution that we're looking at the moment, that we're experiencing, that we're living through at the moment, is that it's going to create thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions around the world, millions of new jobs. While people think there's a lot of cost associated, yes, there's a lot of cost, but a lot of that cost is in technology, in innovation, in creating new technologies, new energy supplies, new energy sources. It's tremendously exciting, because with that, they're going to come millions of really high quality new jobs around the world. So I think that's part of the just transition, making sure that the skills are there, that those opportunities are being created around the world. But a lot of this comes down to, again, as I mentioned in answer to the previous question, around creating the right structures so that we're getting the money into these economies, into these projects in the right way, in a way which actually is positive and incentivizes the change that's required. That isn't actually sort of debt that's going to sit on and strangle that economy for years to come. And it is possible. This is all doable.
And let's dig deeper into that, specifically the role of government and the role of policy in terms of nudging, we'll use the word nudging corporations toward this just transition, nudging corporations toward this net zero goal. How do you see policy and government officials influencing business leaders toward that?
Well, we've actually got an event here. I'm really looking forward to the Net Zero Delivery Summit coming up over the next couple of days here in London. It's going to be a really exciting opportunity to bring policymakers, to bring the finance world together, to talk about how we make some of this happen. Because there's a lot. It's a complicated picture. The role of the multilateral development banks, for instance, is a critical one that we need to work on over the next few years. We don't have much time. We've got to have a look. We've got to find out how we can make the multilateral development banks, the DFIs, the development finance institutions, actually to transform. They're going to have to transform the way they do their business. There's huge interest in this. There's a lot of appetite in the finance world to talk about this. We've got to now bring the policymakers and the politicians, because it's the national governments that are the shareholders in these institutions. So we have got to convince the governments around the world, that these institutions need to play a much more engaged, much more positive role alongside private finance in the transition to net zero, in that race to net zero. It's some of this will be difficult. I'm talking only the other day to a representative of one of the leading UK insurance companies, who was saying what they're thinking about is what we almost need a new Bretton Woods to talk about re-engineering the financial architecture of the world to cope with the change, to facilitate the changes that are required in the transition to net zero. And at the heart of that, I think, are some of these international institutions that are going to have to really rethink the way they do their business.
You frame this as a race, and COP27 is going to be here before you know it. So with that said, you're doing a lot of advocating, on behalf of the City of London, on behalf of the narrative around net zero. What do you think needs to be accomplished between now and COP27 to really meet some of the long-term goals that you have?
Well, we are almost exactly the halfway point between COP26 and COP27, and didn't that 6 months go very quickly, which is, of course, the real issue here. Time ticks away very, very, very fast, very quickly, and if we don't get on, actually start doing things, we'll find another 6 months will have gone past, another year will have gone past, and actually we're still talking. So what the critical thing now is actually to start seeing how we mobilize the capital that's there. That GFANZ, Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, back in November in Glasgow, $130 trillion, 450 financial institutions around the world saying they had this capital available to be deployed over the next decade towards net zero projects. We've got to now start putting down some fairly clear markers in terms of how much, when. Let's start seeing that capital flowing, and I think that's really at the heart of the discussions over the next 6 months to COP27. If we don't have some clear markers in place by the time we get to COP27, I start to get a little bit worried about how much longer we go on talking before we get to actually delivering.
So goals, but just as important as goals, those
milestones, absolutely. And just saying, let's see where we are. One of the reasons we're doing the Net Zero Transition Summit, Delivery Summit, and the word is the key is in that third word in the title of this, the Net Zero Delivery Summit. We are looking at how we deliver on this, is to come back to that question where we are. We don't have the ability to do a full sort of stock take of where we are in terms of the delivery since November, but we'll get a fairly clear sense of what's happening, but more particularly, where we're going and what we're going to do in the next 6 months running up to COP27. But we're also already thinking about COP28 in Abu Dhabi and beyond that as well, and beginning to see how, what are those milestones we've got to have clearly in place between now and each of those events.
Wow. So from focusing on developing economies to focusing on how to bring the corporate sector where they need to be, specifically the financial sector, and also really focusing in on those goals and those milestones. It sounds like there's a lot at work. So congratulations on the great work that you've done already and what you're going to accomplish.
Well, thank you very much. It's absolutely, it's so exciting to be involved in this. It really is, and it's wonderful. Last Friday, when I was in Sao Paulo, talking to a group involved in finance from various sectors of the finance world, but also involved in agriculture in Brazil, talking about how they are looking to finance small farming enterprises moving to net zero in the Amazon. And you can see how it won't take much to do it. A little bit of imagination, a little bit of creativity, and then we get that capital in there. When you see it's almost tantalizingly close. We can make a real difference here. It's so exciting.
And is it pretty scalable? Is it something that you'll be able to deliver once this use case, if you will, is worked out? You'll be able to deliver it elsewhere.
Absolutely right. Mm-hmm. So much of this is scalable. So many of these models, when the models work, those will be transferable. You will be able to use similar models across the world, in developing economies across the world.
What are some of the biggest objections that you're seeing to using that? It's scalable. We have the capital. What's still in the way of making this happen?
A lot of it is just I suppose it's the things that always hold back. It's process and systems and bureaucracy and all of those things that make things slip into the too difficult to do today sort of category, and they slip into the put them in the in tray and we'll come back to them. It's that sort of, very often it's just that inertia factor that we're looking to do something different. But I would come back because I think it's a really important point, and I'm sure it's going to be discussed in a number of the sessions here in Mansion House over the next couple of days at the Net Zero Delivery Summit. The role of the international institutions, such as the multilateral development banks, that I think is pretty much top of everybody's list of things to think about and to talk about. And I think we really do need to look very closely at this, and we probably need to move pretty quickly on this as well, because at the moment there is a danger that they're crowding out private finance rather than being the conduit, rather than being the facilitator, that their business models put them in competition directly with private finance providers, rather than facilitating the private finance model. So that's, I think, something we're going to have to come back to and look at pretty quickly, because we want to get that one right.
And it sounds like that could be global as well. So how do you work your way around that? How do you partner with them and to really explore the partnership as opposed to that aspect?
Well, I think the big issue here, as I say, is getting national governments engaged on this topic, because they're the shareholders in these institutions, and they're the ones that will change the mandates of these of the institutions concerned. That's the critical role. So I think we're going to be talking about it over the next couple of days. I've absolutely no doubt it's going to be a big issue up to and at COP27 in Sharm El-Sheikh, and beyond that, because I think it's a very critical role. They play such a critical role in finance in the developing economies of the world that we need to make sure that they're playing the right role in terms of facilitating the transition to net zero.
And also, I have to say, regulation in the UK has just really led the way. Again, do you see continued, in your talks to these global countries, do you see countries really adopting what the UK has already put down?
There's a lot of interest. There is a lot of interest in that. Absolutely. I mean, what we're doing at the moment, and we're looking forward to changes coming through in relation to our pension funds, our life companies, and the ability that they will have to invest in greener, more sustainable assets, long-term infrastructure assets, and such like, which at the moment they're under the current solvency regime, they are disincentivized to invest in them. The changes are coming there. There's John Glenn, the City Minister, Economic Secretary to the Treasury, has announced changes which are being worked through with the regulators at the moment. Those are the sort of changes that are of real interest. But we have to face it. One of the problems, how a lot of the developing economies of the world, they don't have pension they don't have those great pension funds that we've got here in the developed world. So we're going to have to think about how we mobilize some of that capital that we've got here into the developing economies too, because they just don't have the depth of the size and scale of pension funds that we do that we enjoy here.
Right. So, and just to really wrap things up, we know that global temperatures are already at 1.1 degrees above the pre-industrial levels, meaning we don't have much time. Again, time comes around to play to dramatically cut emissions. How can this be done in a way that really looks at the total picture? So ensuring that the financial sector, they're working together and that they're partnering, ensuring, as you said before, that no one's really left behind, and ensuring that we can do that globally. What do you see as the main focus point that we need to look at to do that?
It's all about the conversations that happen, the international conversations, bringing the key players in the financial services, the finance sector together, and having those conversations at the highest level in those organizations. So we have the CEOs and the chairs of those organizations sitting down together and talking about what they're doing they know what the challenge is. They know they have the money. It's a matter of getting them, getting their companies fully engaged and committed. And events such as the Net Zero Delivery Summit, such as His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales Sustainable Markets Initiative, which was also meeting here in London this week across a sort of wider range of sectors than just the finance sector. All of these are really important because it's the conversations that happen at these events that actually begin to make the real difference in the private sector. sector. That's what I, and of course, as Lord Mayor, one of the things I can do is to convene those conversations. This role is a tremendous platform to convene people, and I'm so looking forward to the next couple of days doing that with the Net Zero Delivery Summit here in London.
Great, exciting information. And thank you so much for sharing. Lord Mayor of London, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.